The Pope and Young Club wants to welcome you as we rally together to ensure our bow hunting opportunities for today and tomorrow. You've come to the podcast that believes in preserving, protecting, and promoting the passion for bow hunting. Join us as we strive to be the voice of today's bow hunter. This is the Pope and Young Podcast. All right, guys, welcome to the Pope and Young Podcast. Tim and I are joined by special guest, archery's hidden gem is what I call him. Well, we'll just say it. One of the best looking guys in archery. We've got Byce III, who is the director of operations there in Gainesville, Florida at the Bear Archery factory. But Neil, what we really want to talk about is kind of just not only the rich history that is Bear Archery, but you have been there since you were 19 years old. You were, well,
Right.
You're one of Fred Bear's last living students. So you have been in the industry throughout all the change and all the innovation and everything that, took place with the development of the takedown and the compounds being introduced. So we just wanted to talk about kind of the history of archery and how you've seen things change over the years. But before we jump in, give us an introduction to yourself and kind of your history there at Bear.
Well, thanks. The first piece is I'm glad you didn't want me to really talk about my good looks, like you said, but
Well, that
but
doesn't need to be talked about. They're watching you, so you don't have to even mention that.
uh, yeah. Well, anyways, it's a pleasure to be on today. My name is Byce. I'm third generation Byce. So my dad worked for Bear Archery for 32 years. I've worked for Bear Archery for 45 years. I met Mr. Bear when I was 7 years old, and at a company picnic. And of course, I had the ability to see him throughout some of my younger years, and then started working for Bear in 1977, and went to college for a year, and then started working for Bear in 1978, and I've been there ever since. So had a brief stint where I went back to Michigan for about a year, and but other than that, have worked for Bear Archery. So had the ability to work for Mr. Bear on the signature bow project, which was in the early 80s. That's the one with the gold sockets and Bolivian, East Indian rosewood and ebony stripes, African ebony stripes on it. But real nice project to be working on. And then got involved in compound bows and was a supervisor of the assembly area of compound bows for a good number of years, and then worked my way up through the ranks at Bear Archery, and did a number of different things, almost everything here that we do. So long history. Was able to work with Mr. Bear, Bill Stewart, got Gary Simons, and of course my dad, my dad, Neil Byce Jr. So
Now, just so everybody knows, you are sitting in Mr. Bear, Papa Bear, the chief. That's his office. That was his office that you now call your office.
yeah, I call it Mr. Bear's office. It is the office I reside in. But yeah, I'm privileged to be able to be sitting in here. There was quite a while where this office sat vacant, and I would use it for inspiration for some of the projects that we'd work on, mostly the traditional projects, because that's where Mr. Bear really flourished in the industry and everything. Obviously, he supported the compound and in everything archery, but of course he flourished in the traditional side. And all the stuff that he used to have in here when the museum sold it went away with him. But the paneling's still the same, and the walls and everything in here are an inspiration. So I used to, prior to moving in here, I had a big table in here, and we'd have some meetings in here trying to inspire people. Yes, what are we here for? It's about archery. Yeah, we're Bear Archery, and we want to survive as a company, and we want to do things that make the iconic company that we are more of a legacy for many more generations to come. So it's an inspiration, but it's also, I've tried to put some artifacts and some things that I've collected over the years to make it look somewhat like Mr. Bear's office. Of course, I got a lot more paperwork stacked up on my desk right now, but nonetheless, Mr. Bear really took to heart some of the artifacts and gifts that people gave him over the years that were based on friendships of people in archery and relationships that help grow the sport of archery. So that's what we try to do here.
Well, I'd
Now,
like to ask,
go
35
ahead.
years later since Fred Bear passed, um, how many people that worked there in Gainesville besides yourself had the privilege to work with him at all? Are there any?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So we have it's a unique situation. We have, I think there's 4 people besides myself that have 40 years plus here at the facility, and then we have several with more than 35 years. So Tammy Merricks, Yen Morrow, Liz Petrie, some of them are obviously are women. And but then Mike Latimer, Dick Latimer's son. Dick Latimer was the president of the ATA for a number of years, but he also was the leading marketer for Bear Archery in the mid to late 60s and through the 70s and 80s. And then he's took a job with which at the time was the AMO, is prior to the ATA changing its name from AMO, Archery Manufacturers Organization, to the Archery Trade Association. So Dick Latimer headed that up and was the president of that for years. And so Mike's his son. The 2 of us graduated in high school together, so
Oh,
we're
wow.
we've known each other for a long time. So
So with that, knowing that there's people there that have a memory and a passion for Bear that came from Fred himself, I'm just curious to think, what is the atmosphere like? Is it still very similar to how it was? And more importantly, to me, if Fred were here, what would he think of the company, archery? What would he think of hunting today?
yeah, well, you're asking quite a bit there in one sentence, but when you look at the people in the atmosphere, the ones that knew Mr. Bear, obviously he treated everybody with compassion and friendliness that was, no matter who you were, if you're working at the factory and you were working at the business, that you were a family. And he always had that uh, um, air about him that he welcomed people. So he'd walk up to you and the more you got to know him, the friendlier he got, and he'd even just try to get comical with you in one way or another, telling you a joke or something that was just getting you to loosen up, that he wanted to talk with you. And so when you look at the number of folks that we have here that are that had some form of relationship with him, they try to pass that on. We still have some signs here in the facility that were some of his one-liners that talk about the company, and like the customer is the main reason we exist, and a number of things that just remind us of some of the things that are important for a business to survive, but also what are we trying to do. So the people that have been here that long, most of the time they're really trying to coach people into understanding who Fred Bear was, because if you think about it, Mr. Bear passed in 1988, and a lot of the folks that we employ now weren't might not even have been born in that time frame. So but I think it comes across when you look at a company that's been around, and you do have a number of folks that have been with the company since it opened the doors here in Gainesville in 1978, that people catch on to that. And not everybody does. And the thing that we try to do is get people to understand archery and that's a piece. What would Mr. Bear think? You know, in my mind, Mr. Bear was an innovator, and I don't think many people can argue with that. I think he was a marketer, and I believe that most people who knew who Fred Bear was would understand in the times that he developed archery and what he did to uh, develop films and get people to watch hunts and get involved in archery and go and do it, having a great time. Um, I think people or he tried to do things that would get people involved, and then the other pieces of, I don't know, what would he think? He was a hunter, okay? He loved to hunt. He loved to fish. He liked to be out in the outdoors. He just wanted people to get out in the outdoors and experience the things that he was able to experience. And so what would he say? I think archery and what people get to experience today is phenomenal. And I think, if he was setting up there, he would say, I had a lot to do with influencing people getting out and hunting. And um, when the compound first came out, Mr. Bear supported archery. How do we get more people involved in archery? And although, he still um, pretty much used a recurve bow at the time, he still wanted people to get involved in archery. And there's always those choices that people make and everything, but I don't believe he drew a line in the sand and said, hey, you're not an archer if you're using a recurve, or you're not a real hunter unless you're using a compound, whatever argument somebody might have. I think he just wanted people to be involved in archery, and that's really our philosophy. What can we do to get people involved in archery? What can we do to be cost conscious? That was one of the things that Mr. Bear always tried to do. How can you improve your methods to keep the price down on products so that you can get everybody as many people as you can involved in archery, whether it be youth, whether it be target, whether it be hunting or just recreational shooting. What type of archery do you like? It doesn't really matter as long as you're trying to get a stick and string or a compound in somebody's hand and get them shooting. And I think if Mr. Bear was looking down at some of the things that we're doing as a company, Escalade owns us. I think Escalade values Bear Archery as an iconic company and recognizes the things that Mr. Bear did is really iconic in the industry, and values Bear Archery. And really, I think Mr. Bear would be proud of a lot of what we do. Everybody makes errors in life, and Mr. Bear would tell you that he made a few too when it comes to even some of his product designs and stuff. But you know what? You got to look to the future and try to move forward and put the bad stuff behind you and put the good stuff in front of you. And remember the good stuff.
Well, and I think it's definitely no secret to everybody that I have a close working relationship with the guys at Bear, and I have said several times that I believe Fred would be very proud of Bear Archery because they've remained that company that wants to be inclusive. When Bear puts out a new catalog, I can look at that and find a new bow for my 4-year-old, my 6-year-old, my 12-year-old, my wife, myself, my dad, new recurves, new compounds, super inclusive. At every price point, I can find new bows for myself at a $400 price point or a $1,200 price point. And so I think Fred would be proud of that, but I also think he'd be proud of the way that the factory is ran and the way the company itself is ran. Because Tim, he's downplaying it. I mean, they have 120 employees there. And when I toured the factory with him, Neil went to every single person and called them by their first name. Hey, Mike, how are you this morning? Hey, Bill, how are you this morning? Hey, Gary, how are you this morning? And about the 10th person he did it to, I was like, man, he knows every single one of these people. And I didn't mention that to him when I was there, but I noticed that. And then I get back home and I'm having a conversation with the guys from Identical Draw who were there just a couple weeks before me, and they said, dude, one thing I noticed is that Neil knew everybody by their first name, and I was like, I noticed that too, and so I think the history and tradition that is there, um, and the way that you guys represent archery and the way that you guys carry yourselves, I do think Fred would be very proud. I also think he'd be very proud to see that everything is still made in the United States of America. Compounds, recurves, everything is, dude, every recurve, Tim, is handmade right there. They start with a block of wood and make it into a bow. Every recurve. And I think he would be very proud of that. That you guys have kept everything in the United States. And so I do think he'd be very proud. Do you was there any kind of pushback at all on the compound from Fred? I mean, did he ever, not want to get into the production of them because he is a traditional guy, or I mean, was
Well,
there ever that at all?
no, I think at the time, of course, I wasn't sitting at Bear Archery at the time, but I know that my dad worked with Mr. Bear and Norm Groner and a few of the other guys that were in research and development. And I think it was more of the fit and finish that Mr. Bear was. I think from day one, I'm not really sure that he was like, I'm a compound guy. I don't really, you look at some of the first ones, they're like, oh my gosh, why would I even touch that? But nonetheless, Bear Archery came out with the Alaskan in 1975, and it was a sleek looking compound bow, and only 30% let off. And I think some of that stuff, I think Mr. Bear could appreciate, but when you have the skills that he had with a recurve, and you take and use a compound, and people weren't using releases at the time. The release wasn't even on the books really at that time. Everybody was still shooting fingers, and he didn't speak against it. I mean, you see him on a couple of the covers of some of the like archery catalogs that we produce for the manuals and stuff like that, with Mr. Bear holding a compound and all that. And he shot them, tested them. And so was he against them? No, I think he understood that each step of archery, there's going to be another step, and it's going to be, that was a major one. It was a major transition. And there's a lot of folks that said, well, he didn't really like him. Well, I never heard Mr. Bear say that to me. And I'm on the cover of the 1984 catalog with Mr. Bear holding a compound bow. And so, I mean, plenty of opportunities, but he was always about the company and how to grow archery. And if it wasn't necessarily for him, he's not going to just speak badly about it. And if somebody was talking with him and he was like, well, do you shoot one? He might have said, no, I don't shoot one. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't shoot one.
Yeah.
So, I guess it went back to, I think it goes back to, what is your preference in archery? As long as you're getting out in the field, as long as you're going out there and experiencing archery, doesn't really matter what you're shooting. So,
Well, that's what more people need to learn that from Papa Bear himself, that just because somebody shoots a different brand or a different style, or whether they shoot fingers or releases or compounds or recurves or longbows or self bows, it's archery, man, and we need to stick together. Fun fact, that first Alaskan that you mentioned, that was the first bow, Tim, this is a fact for you. That was the first bow that Chuck Adams shot his first Pope and Young animal with. And now today, Chuck shoots the remake of the Alaskan that came out last year. He when he came to Bear, he said, I got to shoot the Alaskan because that was the first bow. Its namesake was the first bow I ever shot my first Pope and Young. I think it was a moose. My first Pope and Young animal with. And so that's still what he's shooting today, is that Alaskan. Of course, it's much more advanced now and a lot faster, a lot quieter, a lot lighter. But yeah, that was a fun fact there.
yeah. I mean, the Alaskan was, in my mind, it was still a laminated limb. It had fiberglass laminated with wood, and it had a aluminum riser, and Bear Archery had already, well, they had magnesium then, excuse me. So it was a mag riser, and it was nice and slim and sleek like the original A and B risers were. So it wasn't very much different than a B riser, takedown riser that was with the limbs attached to it. And of course you had the cables on them, and it was a pulley system, and it had where you adjusted the cables. It had like a T-handled Allen wrench that went in there, and it'd click, and you could adjust the cables. And increase your draw length and stuff like that. But again, those first compounds were only like 30% let off, and gravitated 50% pretty quickly after that. But nonetheless, they were pretty light, and they were, I don't know, I think the Alaskan was maybe 48 inches long, somewhere in there. I don't recall exactly, but it's pretty close to that. So they weren't like really short bows like they are today. Our compounds are, in the sub 30s, I guess, for the most part, for people that are hunting. The tournament guys are still shooting ones that are over 35 inches, but most hunters are using bows that are between 30 and 35 inches long, axle to axle, and it suits their needs. It's good for tree stands, and probably a large percentage of the population uses tree stands, and even if you're in ground blinds, or in blinds, shorter the bow you have, the better maneuverability you have, and when you're using those. So when you're shooting a recurve bow, you have something that might be 55 to 65 inches long, recurve or longbow, and somewhere in there. And so it's a different type of game in the quarters that you can be in, so some of the blinds might be too small for somebody with a recurve. So it's fun to use all the stuff though.
Speaking of very specific bows that are both historic and brought back, I don't know if you brought back the Alaskan so much as it's just been there forever. You've brought back the Kodiak. It's the Super Kodiak. I've been reading about this because Dylan's trying to get me into shooting a traditional bow. And what's the significant either improvement or difference from the series that you're doing now versus from the past? Is what is the improvement, or is it really going back to a very similar design and component?
So in 2012, we asked, or it was before that we asked our customers. We went to a bunch of the traditional shows, ETAR, Compton, Howard Hill, and some of the other traditional only shoots that were around. We're talking about traditional bows here. And we said, which bow, if we were going to bring one back, because if you look out there, bear archery bows from the past are highly collectible. And even some of the more recent, they're just collectible. Okay. And people are still shooting some of the bows from the 50s and 60s out there, in 70s out there. And one of the bows that came up, one of the bows that came up was a Kodiak. Now there's been several iterations of the Kodiak, because what Mr. Bear did was he would just change the design of it, and there was still a Kodiak. So the Kodiak name has been around since the early 50s. And the 1959 Kodiak is the one that kind of stuck with everybody. And the reason is there's a few things that changed in 1959 with bear archery. And one was the inclusion of exotic woods. Prior to 1959, almost everything was walnut and maple, with fiberglass glued to the limbs, but mostly those materials. And then in 1959, there was Brazilian rosewood, purple heart, and some other types of babinga and some other types of wood that were imported so that they could make them out of a more luxury looking type of material. And so when you then in 1959, it's also the same year that Mr. Bear created his logo in the medallion that gets put in every one of the bows. So that year, that bow, not only was it really, really nice to look at and pretty handsome bow, but it also shot really, really well. And so it's a pretty comfortable bow. So that bow, 1959 Kodiak, we now reproduce. We started reproducing it back in 2012. And it's really, really, it's a really nice shooting bow. So the difference is that the layout of the bow is the same on the 59 Kodiak. The materials are slightly different. One, you know, the current model is a little bit different. We've just changed some colors. But when we reintroduced it, we used Purple Heart. It was an I-beam construction. Okay, so that means that we took two pieces of Bolivian rosewood, not Brazilian rosewood, but sandwiched them between a piece of or around Purple Heart. So the middle of the bow was Purple Heart, so that when you cut the sight window out, you had this reveal of the Purple Heart in the sight window, yet both sides were Bolivian rosewood. And then the face and the back of the riser, we put a strip of Purple Heart on it. So it was pretty decorative riser when in the makeup of it. And then we matched the colors of the glass from 1959. There was two different colors. The face side was a caramel color, and the back side of the bow away from you was a reddish dark brown color. And then, of course, we put a cap on it and a leather grip on it and a feather rest, which if you haven't ever used a feather rest, they're really cool to use. And so we pretty much tried to make it like a 1959, except for we use modern materials. And so it's Mr. Bear's design. We make them on, none of the tooling was left from 1959. So all the tooling had to be recreated and everything, with the exception of the machines, the presses that Mr. Bear used, not the actual form, but the presses. We still use those same presses that Mr. Bear designed way back in the 50s and 60s. And we use Richardson's to do some of our grip shaping so that, when you do a grizzly, it's the same one. But, in the 1959 was prior to those machines and some of that stuff. But so really old techniques, but highly reproducible techniques to give you, a really nice shooting bow.
Interesting. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, and some of the same techniques that were developed right there in Gainesville are some of the same techniques that most bowyers across the country still use. So all those innovative things that Fred was doing, most bowyers still are using those same techniques.
Yeah, if you go back into the late 60s, early 70s, Mr. Bear had the Fred Bear Sports Club, and they produced videos to send around a sports club. So that was part of the marketing, is they produced these hunts and the videos and all that, which was really, really good for the sports clubs around. And then he also produced one that was called Rural Route 1, which he actually went into the factory and showed people how a bow was made. So if you were somebody that was like, how do you do that? You basically had a video that would go through. It didn't show you every little detail, but if you were a woodworker, you'd be able to figure it out. So Mr. Bear wasn't afraid of showing people how to do it. It's one of those things where I want to get people involved in archery. And, he had several patents over the years. One was the use of fiberglass on the bow. That was Mr. Bear's patent. He didn't charge people patent or royalties for any of that kind of stuff. Like I've said in the past, today you can't really do that. You need to make sure you protect your patents and royalties, because somebody will do something with it that might damage your business. But back in the day, Mr. Bear was like, yeah, you want to use fiberglass? Go ahead. Yeah, you want to do that? That's fine. Go ahead. So, he really, really wasn't afraid of his competition, and there was plenty of competition in those days also. So, really, just do the right thing and move forward. So
You spoke just briefly, and we are aware of this as well. The amount of value or collectability a lot of the Bear products have. We see it in our fundraising events. Anything that says Fred Bear, anything that has his photo, any old boat, any old anything, even if it's in mediocre condition, is highly sought after in our fundraising. We see it in social media. It's interesting. The honor of Fred Bear isn't just Bear Archery. You've got social media groups, pages. You've got clubs that honor people with Fred Bear awards. You've got shoots named after Fred Bear. Pope and Young has a society called the Fred Bear Society. A lot of honor is given to Fred. Was he, would he today be overwhelmed with that? Would he be proud of that? Would it bother him? I'm trying to understand this personality outside of what I've read.
Well, I would say that he wouldn't be somebody that said, "Oh, I've earned this. I deserve this." He wouldn't be like that at all. But I believe that, if you ever met him, that he was eloquent in whenever he would speak to groups of people, and he would make you feel like you're part of him. Make you He'd open his arm to you in a manner that would be in an individual, where he could pick you out of a crowd and come over and start talking to you like he'd known you. He'd try to get in your head a little bit about what are you thinking about archery, but when he would speak publicly, when he'd speak to the employees, I don't know if he just had a natural grace for stuff like that, but as far as understanding people and wanting to be, one on one with people, I never. I'm sure that in his lifetime that there was times when he wasn't happy with what people did, and I could tell you, that story about the blue stripe when he wrote "No Blue Fred FBB" on the riser, that he definitely was sending me a message that we're not going to put blue in that. Don't push it. I got the message, but it was like the conversation never happened. So there was, and I would say that, if he was getting an award for, like, I seen a video that was from a sportsman's club in Michigan. It was the Houghton Lake Sportsman's Club in Michigan. I seen he got up and he spoke and he told this story, and if you ever get a chance to see it out there, it's a story about how bow hunters don't know how to lie like fishermen or something like that. And but he goes into this whole thing and he goes off and he's talking about stuff, and then he brings it all around full circle, and then they give him this plaque at the end and everything. And everybody just wanted to shake his hand just because he got them on, or he was at their level, or whatever way you want to bring that. He was one of them, and they could see themselves being able to go out and do that, or having them same thought processes. The one thing that Mr. Bear had was the ambition to keep on going when people wouldn't see that there was another 2 or 3 or 4 steps to go before you could get to that next plateau. And I think somehow he figured it out, and he went and did it. If you worked all day in a factory and you're looking for the weekend to maybe get some rest and relaxation or get some things done around the house, he was looking for, I got to go out and get a hold of these other dealers and see what they think about this, and try to move some product, or get them how many more bows do they need, or are we meeting our delivery schedule, or what do you think about the new stuff? It was continuous. It was and then trying to figure out where he's going to go hunt. I'm going to go hunting at the same time, and I'm going to go do all this stuff also. So amazing individual, and involved in some of the other wildlife projects that are out there. He was a supporter of the Pittman-Robertson Act, and stood up and brought that out, tried to support it. But he also, Trout Unlimited, he was a huge supporter in getting that all started also. So he was a fly fisherman on top of it. And that was one of his passions outside of, I guess you wouldn't call it outside of, because if you're a true sportsman, you have, you've got all those things in your basket. So, he liked to bird hunt, and so that means he was using some type of shotgun of some type, and just the whole gamut. So,
well, and that's what he was a massive supporter of Pope and Young, And like Tim said, we have the Fred Bear Society. Well, the reason it's called the Fred Bear Society, that's our trust fund, is because he was the one that made the first massive donation to the trust fund. So he was just a firm believer in, not only representing archers well, but supporting conservation and pushing forward for to preserve bow hunting for future generations. Is it true that Fred Bear smoked cigarettes, but he would never do it on camera or on film because he didn't want to represent hunting that way?
Well, I'd lie to you that if I told you he didn't smoke cigarettes, because he did. I've had pictures of him smoking cigarettes and everything. Me personally, I would say I would say I did see him smoke cigarettes before this, but nonetheless, go back and look at all the rags of the time and the era and all that stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
almost I would say not everybody smoked, but there was a huge campaign for
Well,
cigarettes.
not I don't remember who told me that, but I want to say it was Eichler. But he was sharing that, he cared so much about how he represented hunters and hunting as a whole that
Yeah,
even though he smoked, he would never be seen on camera or
yeah,
on film or anywhere smoking because he didn't want to represent the hunting community that way. And I just thought, man, that's powerful because
yeah.
not many people, I mean, so many people just do whatever they want and never think about how it represents us as hunters now.
Well, I think Dylan, as a transition, when you look at, Mr. Bear was born in 1902, and he lived through World War One and he lived through World War Two, and things things at that time were just different. All the stuff that you see, I was going through some files the other day, and there's a old magazine from 1977, a Sports Illustrated, um, from 1977, and it has a bear bow in it. All that's on it is the picture of the bow and everything, and you know, not long after that, cigarette smoking, or people still smoke cigarettes. People have a choice to do what they want to do, and that's all their choices. But I guess what I would say is all of the advertising, and if you look through magazines at that time, it's inundated with cigarette ads and everything. And there was a time when a huge amount of population openly did that, smoked. But nonetheless, that has become a thing where you don't want to groom people to smoke cigarettes, and so advertising on cigarette commercials or commercials, geez, just look at the TVC. That's beyond, you know, that all was gone, Dylan, probably when before you were born, almost, but nonetheless, the whole community has changed on that as far as what you can do and what you can't do. And he grew up in that time when it was very, very popular to smoke. When I was in high school, it was very popular to smoke, and right after that, and it wasn't very much longer after that, it wasn't very popular to smoke. But yet, it's one of those things. You're right that when he was with folks, um, the composure and the respect for all of that was out there. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
What what do you think, Neil? What do you think the biggest innovation that changed archery, at its core? What do you think that big outside of the compound, but single innovation that really redirected the route that archery was going?
Um when I look at when I think about that, it's before I was born. I think that when Mr. Bear came up with the production techniques to build traditional bows and to add fiberglass to them so that they lasted as long as they have. Because if you just build a wooden bow and you use it a lot, it's not going to last forever. But you put fiberglass on it and it's manufactured correctly with good techniques, that thing can last. Gosh, like I said, there's bows that people are shooting from the 50s out there, and they really put it to it. So I think the fiberglass on the bows is a was remains a big deal. Big deal.
Yeah.
So
I
what do
mean,
you see coming down the line 20 years from now? What are we going to see in the bow hunting equipment world out of Bear or out of anybody? What can we expect? Are we going to see something mind-blowing? I mean, technology is surprising us in all facets of life.
yeah, yeah. I mean, as far as the technology goes, I mean, really, I think it would be an out of the box type of deal that would have to be there that would be accepted. I believe that maybe there's some material like carbon's been used in some of the stuff, and other than making it lighter and a little bit stronger really doesn't improve the speed, like, oh, speed is this and that. Really, I think efficiency in the product is going to be how the ease of use of the products and everything. And I've been involved with compounds, since I started working at Bear. They made compounds, and so I wasn't there. I was a few years behind that. I was on the beginning edge of it. But I think there's new things that we can dress out the compound bows to make them, integral with some of the stuff that we use. And but at the end of the day, the next piece would have to be something that it's really hard for me to imagine. I'm sorry, Tim, but
Well, yeah, that's why I
I
ask. It seems
yeah,
like for 25 years that I've been shooting a bow,
yeah,
speed has gone up maybe 100 feet per second max. The weight of the bow maybe has gotten lighter. The efficiency, the smoothness has, but it hasn't, there hasn't been one gigantic leap. And there's always got to be things that you're fine tuning as, the person in charge of day to day and everything, that maybe you'll look back 20 years from now and say, wow, we did have a big change. And maybe it won't be a big, giant 1 year thing.
yeah,
But there's also that fear of technology in archery. There's also that keeping it what it is. I think that's another testament to the bows that you made in the 50s and 60s that people are still shooting. They want that. It's a thing that we face here at Pope and Young, looking at technology in the archery world all the time and making decisions, taking position on technology and how it's used in the world of bow hunting. Um,
yeah.
I think one thing that is on everybody's mind at Pope and Young all the time is what new thing is going to come out that's going to change it negatively. But I'm really curious as to what maybe you think of that will change it positively.
Yeah, well, if I look back, um, there was the compound, and then it went from 30% to 50% was a big deal. And then to 65% was a significant. I mean, and they were still round wheels at that time. And then cams came out with modules to where a person wouldn't have to change the wheel. They could change the draw length by changing a module. And then but you still had this timing thing. And then the one cam came out, which pretty much eliminated timing issues and stuff like that. And then it was groomed with modules on it. And so there's been steps all along the way. I look at where we're at today, and I'm sure there's ideas of folks out there. I mean, I have ideas, but putting that to where it's a really functional piece of equipment that actually pays out, from a standpoint of development and investment, and will that work? Will it be accepted? you know. And then you're right. I mean, you can look at, things like, well, what if somebody has a rangefinder built in their bow? Well, it starts taking, they already have a rangefinder, and then they have to set their bow for whatever they're. Now, if it's built into a bow, that is a piece of technology that could change the game to making things more accurate because, where did they hold it? I mean, there's still that changeover factor in executing a shot and all that. So, and then of course, it's kind of like, the cars started being made in the late 1800s. And you know what? They're still rolling on four wheels. And and even though they're battery powered or they're gas powered or diesel powered, they're still rolling on four. They still have some kind of drivetrain. They still have a transmission. They've found ways to make that horsepower, significant, scary, right? I think that's kind of, I wouldn't say that's where we're at in archery, but we're kind of close to that curve where, there would almost have to be something that'd be different. And that probably to some folks could be maybe scary, but in all reality, I think you're always going to have your traditional archer. They're not going to, there's always going to be that traditional guy. And there's so much room in the compound market. There's good manufacturers out there producing good product, and there's such a wide array of selections of the types of products and everything. They essentially are pretty close to, I'm not calling them the same, but functionality wise, they're pretty close to the same. And just really, I think the thing that would benefit archery the most would probably be that the people like Pope and Young or governing bodies, the ATA, really solidify archery in its own, making sure that hunting's going to be there forever. For when I say forever, I can't think that far out there, right? But I mean, for me, archery, doing what I can for Bear Archery as an iconic company, the things that Mr. Bear did, and being able to, at some point when I'm no longer here, did I lay the groundwork to make sure there was enough of the cornerstone in the walkway for other people to take over and make sure that this company's still around in 50 years from now. Not that we're a fly-by-night company, but Mr. Bear's been gone for quite a while now, right? And
Right.
the company's still doing well, and we have the ability to ride on Mr. Bear's philosophies and stuff like that, because that's really who we are. That's what we believe in, and that is, we live vicariously through him.
So let's get to that hunting side of things. We're talking Bear Archery, but a vast majority of the customers, I would think, of Bear Archery are hunters. What's your hunting outlook? What are you doing every year? Are you hunting every year? Are you or is Bear Archery too much time? Are you getting out there?
Well, there's been there's been years that I haven't actually, I wouldn't say I haven't hunted, but to do what I really like to do, it's a limited time. It's a limited time for me, and making time to go to Illinois or hunt here locally, whether it be just be able to get out a few weekends to hunt turkeys or hunt whitetails. I haven't I haven't hunted in Florida in a number of years, but I've gone to Illinois and I've gone, a couple different places and so, I do have some places that people have invited me to go, and outstanding. And it's really about, for me, making sure that I love to hunt. Let me just make that clear. And some of my experiences out hunting, bar none, um, are are why I love to do what I'm doing, because some of those experiences that I had, I can tell you that people can be in the woods a lot and never experience it. And so I've been fortunate to have some experiences that are amazing. I put it like this, there's golfers out there that golf all their life and never hit a hole in one. And then there's somebody that walks up one of the first times they play and they hit a hole in one. And that doing that or having that experience, let me just say that, because the other guy that has never hit one, probably, if he's a golfer, probably number one on his bucket list, right?
Sure.
So, but for me as a hunter, I've seen lots of big animals in the woods. I've missed my share. Um, um, I've had the ability to harvest a couple, and but I honestly, there's nothing that measures up to the excitement I still have when I am able to draw back, or even have the ability to have something close enough, even though I might not even get a shot to
Did
be
you ever
out
get
there.
to hunt with did you ever get to hunt with Fred?
No, and that's one of the things that, that Tim alluded to. Are you too busy? And so there was a time when in 1987, had a chance to go to Grouse Haven. That was the last Grouse Haven hunt, and was like, oh, when archery season is when we launch our new products. And so I was the supervisor over a compound, and I was like, I really can't afford to go. I got this deadline to meet on this stuff, and our fall depends on making sure that we meet those deadlines. So sometimes I hunt late December somewhere. Might be where the rut's already passed or stuff, but at the same time, opportunity, you just have to get in the woods. Opportunity will come. So I wasn't able to hunt with Mr. Bear. I passed up on that hunt. Like I think I said before, Dylan, some of the times when, I had the opportunity to do things, it wasn't like, oh, this is the last time I'm going to be able to do that because Mr. Bear isn't going
Right.
to be here. I couldn't, that was the farthest thing from my mind, farthest thing from my mind. And as I've gotten older, that's a reality, that
Yeah.
you need to do something. You probably need to figure out how to get it done. If you really feel like you need to do something, do it earlier than later.
Well, and that's why, when I was down there, I told you I made you take a picture with me and of course that beautiful bow that you made me, but I want to cherish all those moments because you never know. Like just last year when Harv Ebers was inducted in the Pope and Young Hall of Fame, I'm like, can I take a picture with you? Just because you never know when is the last time. And I want to be able to hold on to that. Harv was the first person that really taught me how to shoot a recurve. And so any chance I get, I want to talk to him and just spend that time with him because you never know when that last chance is. And so um absolutely, man. I wish you would have got to go though. Still stinks.
Yeah. Yeah. On, I, I had a conversation with Mr. Bear after that, and it was personable. So, it was like he said, well, this is the last year for Grouse Haven, but there'll be plenty of times for you to go hunting, and because I just had the conversation, I really would have liked to have gone, but we had this going because he'd come out on the floor on a regular basis and just chat with me or just say a couple words. It wouldn't last very long, but so I mean, yeah, is there, everybody has regrets, but you can't think about those regrets. You got to move on and accept the responsibility that the decision you made at the time, and just try to, know that if you have an opportunity in the future, make sure you think about it in the right way so that you make the right choice that you can live with. So,
Yeah, absolutely. So Neil, one question that we ask everybody is what's one non-traditional hunting item that you never leave home without, that you always take in the woods with you? Can't be a bow or arrows or release or a finger tab, but what's something non-traditional that you always take with you?
something that's non-traditional that I always take with me into the woods when I go into the woods. That
Yeah,
can't be
something.
part of my can't be a part of my hunting clothing or anything like that.
Well, if it's, I mean, not, you can't say socks. Everybody wears socks, but you know, something, maybe it's something sentimental, or maybe it's something superstitious, or you know,
I
anything
have
like
a
that.
I have an old compass that's one of the kind that's brass, and it clips on the front of your coat. Although I never clip it on my coat, I always have it with me because it was my dad's. And
That's
you
cool.
know, I never. It's there, so if I got lost in the woods, which it's pretty hard to get lost in the woods anymore, but you know, but it's something that he hunted with when he was young, and so that's just something. And then also a knife, even though it's not the one I have on my hip, but I always have it in my backpack. It's my backup knife, right? But it's a knife my dad made in high school,
Oh, wow.
in a
Very
shop
cool.
class, and it's a leather wrapped, probably about 8.5 inches, but with a leather sheath. So anyways, I carry that too. So
Awesome. Well, Neil, thank you so much for coming on, man, and sharing some of the rich history. We could go on and on telling stories
wait
and
a minute,
asking
we're just getting
questions.
started, aren't we? So,
Yeah. Again, we could talk for hours, and I certainly want to I told Tim I would love to have you come to a Pope and Young convention and do, a speaking engagement on archery history and Fred Bear history, and share that, because people want to know that stuff. So
Absolutely.
we could talk for hours and keep asking questions and keep going down different paths. But we do appreciate your time, and guys, again, Fred was a large supporter of Pope and Young, and we appreciate everything he did for us in our early stages, and some of those guys have very fond memories of him, and meetings about Pope and Young, and how to preserve bow hunting. So now it's our job to continue fighting for what he believed in so much for. So Neil, thank you so much for coming on. Guys, you have a fantastic week, and thanks for listening.
thanks,
It's
Dylan.
quite the
Thanks.
honor. Quite the honor.
Appreciate it.